Senator Michael Williams.
Hey, just a quick question. I noticed in this substitute that it's a misdemeanor if you try to use the card for identification purposes. Is that the exact same language as it was in the last bill, or last bill was there like a fine set forth?
Yeah, the only changes that you'll find in there is we changed the term driving safety card to driving privilege card throughout the bill. And then we made the changes I mentioned on the verbiage of the card itself.
Yeah,
Those are the only changes.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions to committee? All right, we do have one more question. Senator Payne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Also, on line 86, it says shall be a misdemeanor with intent to deceive, to use a driver privilege card for identification purposes other than presentment to a law enforcement officer. How would that be enforced?
Well, I suppose like any other, any other criminal statute, if there was a report of a violation, then it would be investigated, and if determined by the respective law enforcement agency that a violation had occurred, they would proceed with making a case.
What if it was out of state?
Again, I think just like with any other violation of a criminal statute, it would require a law enforcement officer to to make that case. When you say out of state, do you mean if they were using the card in another state?
If they used the card, if they were in Louisiana getting on an airplane and they used their ID and where in Louisiana says, well, obviously the state of Georgia has recognized this in an official capacity that this is who this person is, and they let them get on a plane. Are you going to find the person who just let them get on the plane, and also how are you going to find the person who just used their ID as get on that plane? So
in that particular hypothetical circumstance, Senator, they would not be allowed to use the card for that purpose because TSA is a federal agency. The card clearly states it's not for federal identification purposes, so they would be turned away at that point. I don't know that there would be a criminal case that would be initiated at that point, but they would not be allowed to use it for that purpose.
Thank you.
Other questions? We have 3 people signed up to speak. First, Mr. King.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is D.A. King. I have been studying illegal immigration for 15 years. I had hair when I began studying this issue. I have been studying the driver's license issue as well, and I am only here to help educate people to make an intelligent and educated, informed decision on this bill. What I don't hear much of is that there is something in law, federal law, called the Real ID Act. It was passed after 9/11 in an effort to standardize driver's licenses. That federal law merely sets minimum standards for federal acceptance of any state's driver's license. Additionally, the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services issues work permits to people, not all of whom have lawful status in immigration. That document is called an employment authorization document. I'm not trying to be technical, but on each of those documents, they have a code. And those codes denote whether or not the holder has lawful status. Many work permit holders, all of whom have a Social Security number, do not have lawful status. What the goal of this bill is to try to stop Georgia from issuing one tier of driver's license. Other states, including California, Michigan, and South Carolina, have 2 tiers. One of them is a Real ID Act approved driver's license that can be used and recognized by the federal government to board airplanes, Senator, to enter a federal building, to buy weapons or explosives. The other tier can be used for driving privileges but cannot be used as federal identification. In Georgia, we are issuing only one tier. It's marked for non-citizens. It's marked limited term. So a guest student, a guest worker, a real legal immigrant like my adopted sister is getting the same limited term driver's license that someone that USCIS says is under supervision of deportation or their country won't take them back, and they do not have lawful status. I'm trying to stick up for real legal immigrants here. I pray that you will pass out this bill so that Georgia will stop issuing the same driver's licenses to people who do not have lawful status as we issue to real legal immigrants. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. You do have one question from Senator Michael Williams.
When you mention the two-tier systems, the different IDs, what separates the IDs in the different two-tier systems? So like if you would present a tier 1 driver's license from California to me versus a tier 2, what would be different?
The markings on the front of the license, the Real ID Act gives very explicit directions for states that want to issue a driver's license that is not Real ID Act compliant. If you look on your own driver's license, Senator, you'll see a star. And that denotes the Real ID Act compliant. The language that's in this bill is not for federal ID purposes or not for federal identification, is a glaring blinking signal to people, for example, at TSA, that this is not acceptable to board an airplane. It's not acceptable for federal identification.
So tier 2 driver's licenses, say issued in California, would not have that star or not?
No, sir, they do not.
Okay. Thank you.
If I may, Mr. Chairman.
Very briefly, please.
Senator, if you want to go on the DustinEmmonSociety.org and look on the top of my blog page, I've got all this out there.
Thank you, Mr. King. Next, Ms. Rodriguez.
Hey everyone, can you guys hear me?
We can.
Okay, perfect. I've been undocumented for 14 years and I've had DACA since 2012. I don't know if you guys are familiar, but in 1941 in Nazi Germany, Jewish people had to wear badges on all of their clothing stating that they were Jewish. Their passports were stamped with a big J on it stating that they were Jewish. I see a lot of similarities from that sort of identification procedure to the ones that is trying to happen with HB 258. I know that's not light, but that's just the way I see it. I don't understand how taking away a driver's license and making it just for driving purposes makes anyone a better driver. I don't understand how not allowing them to travel makes everything safer. For example, I went to school in New York. I went to Syracuse University, and I had to travel back and forth to go home to see my family. And not being able to travel back home to any other student who might have DACA and needs to go back home to see their family seems a little belligerent. I'm a little worried about this. I don't understand how keeping someone from being able to identify themselves as a human being makes anyone safer. I don't understand why keeping me from being not able to open a bank account makes you guys safer. And I don't understand why, like, making everyone know that I'm not a U.S. citizen, legal U.S. citizen, makes anyone safer. I really don't, sir. That's all I have.
Thank you for your comments. Appreciate it. Okay, next up, Ms. Palacios.
Thank you all for your time and for the spot-on pronunciation of my last name. That almost never happens, so I appreciate that. My name is Maria Palacios. I work with the Georgia Association of Latino Elected Officials. I have a limited term driver's license with me that I'm happy to pass around. Would you like to take a look while I speak? Yes. So I naturalized last year as a U.S. citizen, but before that I was a permanent resident, and before that I was out of status, so I know all too well the different obstacles that require a driver's license or an AID. And I'm up here speaking as a real immigrant, right? As one who really immigrated here, who can speak firsthand, especially with my involvement in the community. Employment authorization permissions from the federal government that have been granted to DACA, who we're targeting here today for a type of scarlet letter. These authorizations, if you can imagine the extra barrier of having now to get a driver safety card or not even being able to use your ID when you go to your employer. Right? Most people think that they only need a license, and with that license that it suffice to have an ID. So imagine now people who have the ability to get employment authorization who cannot even show their employer their driver safety cards because it is a misdemeanor, because that would criminalize them, give them a criminal history where otherwise these people are spotless, right? Because we require them to be so federally. So I want you to keep that in mind. A couple other points that I want you to keep in mind, that other processes that require ID also have additional verification forms. Anytime you get a license or you go purchase any kind of other things that were mentioned in the first testimony require additional paperwork, right? So a driver's license alone cannot get that for you. The last thing that I want to talk about is the possibility of these misdemeanors. I'm the PTA president of Mundy Mill Learning Academy in Gainesville. And so I know oftentimes the numerous times that we require people to show identification, to pick up their kids, to enter into school activities, to even register kids, like I had to for the first time when my 6-year-old was entering in kindergarten. So these are the moments where the branding non-citizen that this bill would require, these are the moments where you would see a lot of discrimination. You would see differential treatment, especially with people that don't know that there's various levels of statuses. We already have a current label for people who are non-citizens. It's limited term. It's on my driver's license that you're passing around, and now as a naturalized citizen, the next time that I get a license, that won't be on there. But for the rest of people who are legal permanent residents or have DACA or otherwise, there's already an existing scarlet letter, and this one is not required. Needless to say that the GBPI also released in February 17th of last year an estimate that $1 million would cost the state. This isn't people who need to get these licenses. So because of the cost that it would be onto our states, because of the fact that we're potentially criminalizing people for using incorrectly or being pushed to use incorrectly their driver safety card, as this bill wants to call it, I would urge strongly that this Senate committee does not vote in favor of it. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Senator McCoon, did you want to close out?
Chairman, we got one more person who wanted to speak on the issue.
Okay, they did not sign up.
He's all the way from Dalton, sir.
Okay, come up very briefly, please. We do have a sign-up sheet for those things.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Rob Bradham. I'm the president and CEO of the Greater Dalton Chamber of Commerce in Dalton, Georgia. In round numbers, our town's population is about 34,000. 50% of those folks are of Hispanic descent, and about a third of our county is of Hispanic descent. We obviously are an employment center for Northwest Georgia. We have the largest floor covering companies in the world are headquartered in Dalton, Georgia, and they employ a good number of the 7,000 or so DACA recipients that live in our community. And if you vote for this bill and pass this bill, it will make it more difficult for our employers, who are in a tight labor market as it is, to employ these DACA recipients who want to be productive members of our community and are productive members of our community. So we ask you to vote no on this bill for the sake of our employers in Northwest Georgia. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Oh, wait, hang on. You have a question, if you would.
No, just a comment. Thank you for about Georgia.
Oh, yes. Hoping we can have one next year that says national champs.
Well said. Okay. Any other questions or comments for the committee? I'm going to ask Senator McCoon to come back up and close us out.
Mr. Chairman, I'll be brief. You were asked to imagine certain circumstances earlier. I would ask you to imagine a country where you can come to the country in violation of the law, and you're provided with a free public education. You're provided with the protection of the laws. You are welcomed in many different ways. All we are asking you to do with a yes vote on this bill is to take the issue of providing a driver's license, or in this case a driver's privilege card, to take the issue related to voter integrity to identification as seriously as the state of California does. And I simply hope, Mr. Chairman, that we can meet that standard, and I would urge a yes vote on the bill.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions to the committee, what is the will of the committee? A motion to pass from Senator Michael Williams. I've got a second from Senator Watson. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All those opposed, like sign. 1, 2, 3, 4. Motion passes. Best luck and rules. There are no other bills before this committee. Thank you all for coming. The meeting is hereby adjourned.